"I don't want a useless old woman here while I'm pregnant," Chelsea said, not even bothering to look up from her phone as she delivered the blow. I watched my son Brian nod in agreement, and something inside me shattered like glass hitting concrete. "You should find a new place to live, Mom," he added, his voice matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing the weather instead of throwing his 64-year-old mother out onto the street. "If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from." The backstory? Well, 6 months earlier, I'd sold my beautiful 3-bedroom home to help Brian and Chelsea with their down payment. "It's temporary, Mom," Brian had promised, "just until we get on our feet." Of course, their version of getting on their feet apparently involved kicking me to the curb the moment I became inconvenient. I'd been living in their converted garage for half a year, paying them rent, cooking their meals, and doing their laundry while they saved money. I'd even helped Brian with the electrical work and flooring when we converted the space, skills I'd picked up helping my late husband with home projects for 30 years. Chelsea's pregnancy had been difficult, and I'd been happy to help. Foolishly, I thought I was being useful. Turns out, I was just being used. "Where exactly am I supposed to go?" I asked, proud that my voice didn't shake. Chelsea finally looked up, her expression cold. "That's not really our problem, Dorothy. We need the space for the baby's nursery." Brian shifted uncomfortably. "There are senior communities. Mom, nice places. You'll meet people your own age." Right, because apparently 64 was ancient, and I needed to be put out to pasture. I'd raised this boy as a single mother after his father walked out. I'd worked 2 jobs, missed sleep, and sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. And this was my reward, being tossed aside like an old appliance that had outlived its usefulness. But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. You learn to keep your cards close to your chest, and boy, did I have cards they didn't know about. "Fine," I said calmly. "I'll be out by the weekend." Chelsea smirked, thinking she'd won. Brian looked relieved. Neither of them noticed the small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of my mouth as I walked back to the garage. 3 days later, I signed a lease on a cozy apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. As I packed my few belongings, I couldn't help but chuckle at their shocked faces when the moving truck arrived. "You found a place that fast?" Brian asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you're motivated," I replied sweetly. What they didn't know was that I'd been planning my exit strategy from the moment Chelsea started treating me like hired help. The apartment wasn't just a backup plan, it was an upgrade. And as for the financial arrangements I'd quietly been making behind the scenes, well, that was about to become their problem very, very soon. Moving day arrived with the kind of spring sunshine that makes everything seem possible. As I supervised the movers loading my meager possessions, I caught Chelsea watching from the kitchen window, her face twisted with what looked suspiciously like regret. "Too little, too late, sweetheart." Brian appeared at my elbow as I climbed into my car. "Mom, maybe we were hasty. If you want to stay—" "No thank you, dear," I interrupted, my voice sugary sweet. "You made your position quite clear. I wouldn't want to be a burden." The guilt was eating at him now, I could tell. Good, let him stew in it for a while. My new apartment was everything their garage wasn't. Bright, clean, and mine. No more tiptoeing around Chelsea's moods or pretending I didn't hear her complaining about me to her friends on the phone. No more being treated like a live-in maid who happened to share DNA with her husband. I was unpacking books when my phone rang. "Dorothy Mitchell?" The voice was crisp, professional. "Speaking. This is Sarah Chen from Hudson Properties. I wanted to confirm your references checked out perfectly. Mr. Hudson is very pleased to have you as our property manager." I smiled, settling into my favorite armchair. "Wonderful. When does he want to start the inspections?" "Tomorrow, if you're available. He's particularly interested in that property on Maple Street, 1247 Maple Street." My heart did a little dance. 1247. Maple Street was Brian and Chelsea's address. "Oh yes," I said, my voice steady as steel. "I'm very familiar with that property." After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it to my reflection in the window. "Here's to new beginnings," I toasted. You see, what my ungrateful family didn't know was that I'd been in contact with Will Hudson for weeks. Will was a property developer with very specific ideas about neighborhood improvement. He'd been buying up houses in Brian's area, renovating them, and either flipping them or turning them into high-end rentals. When I'd learned he was already evaluating properties in Brian's neighborhood, I'd mentioned my situation during our initial conversation. Will's interest in that specific address had been immediate. "That's a prime location," he'd said. "Perfect for our next project." I'd been completely honest about my situation. Well, mostly honest. After being kicked out, I'd started looking for work and contacted Hudson Properties about consulting opportunities. I might have emphasized how cramped the garage conversion was, how the property could really use some updating, and how the current owners seemed overwhelmed by homeownership. Will had offered me a job as a property inspector and acquisition consultant. Decent pay, flexible hours, and the satisfaction of helping identify properties that needed improvement. Tonight, I'd sleep peacefully in my own bed. Tomorrow, I'd begin my new career. And by this time next week, Brian and Chelsea would understand exactly what happens when you throw away someone who's been protecting you from consequences you never saw coming. The next morning, I met Will Hudson at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Brian's house. He was exactly what I'd expected from our phone conversations. Mid-40s, sharp suit, the kind of confident smile that meant business was good. "Dorothy, pleasure to finally meet in person," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I've reviewed your paperwork. Your knowledge of this neighborhood is exactly what I need." We spent an hour discussing his development plans. Will wasn't just buying random houses. He had a vision for transforming the entire area into an upscale community. Property values would triple, which was fantastic news for anyone who wanted to sell. Not so fantastic for anyone who couldn't afford the new tax assessments. "Now about 1247 Maple Street," he said, pulling out a tablet with photos and property records. "You mentioned the owners might be interested in selling?" I sipped my coffee, choosing my words carefully. "Well, they're young parents, first-time homeowners. From what I observed, they're financially stretched. Not a lie. Chelsea's shopping addiction and Brian's beer budget had them living paycheck to paycheck despite their decent incomes. And the property condition? Could use significant updating. The garage has been converted into living space, but I doubt it was done with proper permits. Also, not technically a lie. I'd helped Brian's friend Dave do the conversion, and permit applications had definitely not been part of the process." Will made notes on his tablet. "Perfect. I'd like to make them an offer today. Cash, quick closing. Sometimes young families need the flexibility to relocate quickly." 2 hours later, I found myself walking up the familiar driveway at 1247 Maple Street, clipboard in hand, following Will Hudson to the front door. Through the window, I could see Chelsea's surprised face as she spotted us approaching. Brian answered the door, work shirt wrinkled, looking like he'd had about 3 hours of sleep. "Can I help you?" Will stepped forward, business card extended. "Mr. Mitchell? Will Hudson, Hudson Properties. This is Dorothy, my property assessment consultant." I watched Brian's brain try to process the information. His eyes flicked to me, confusion and dawning recognition warring on his features. "We'd like to discuss a business proposition," Will continued smoothly. "May we come in?" This was it, the moment when everything I'd set in motion would begin to unfold. I kept my expression professionally neutral, but inside, I was counting down to impact. 3, 2, 1. The look on Brian's face when he realized who I was might have been comical under different circumstances. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Hello, Brian," I said pleasantly. "May we come in? Mr. Hudson has a very interesting proposal." Chelsea appeared behind Brian, her pregnant belly making her waddle slightly as she moved. "What's going on?" Then she saw me and her face went white. "What is she doing here?" Will looked between us with the sharp awareness of a man who hadn't built a multi-million-dollar business by missing important dynamics. "You know each other?" "Dorothy is my mother-in-law," Chelsea said, her voice tight. "Was," I corrected gently. "I was asked to find my own place, remember? Mr. Hudson offered me employment, and I mentioned this property might be available for development." The silence that followed was deafening. Brian's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Chelsea grabbed his arm so hard her knuckles went white. Will cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should sit down and discuss business?" They led us to the living room, the same room where Chelsea had called me useless just 4 days ago. I settled into the chair I'd never been invited to use when I lived here, while Will spread papers across their coffee table. "I'll cut straight to the chase," Will said. "I'm prepared to offer you $450,000 cash for this property, closing within 30 days. Chelsea gasped. They'd paid $380,000 18 months ago with my help. That's very generous," Brian stammered. "But we're not looking to sell." "I understand," Will nodded. "However, I should mention that we've identified this entire block for redevelopment. The city has approved our plans for infrastructure improvements. New sewage systems, updated electrical, fiber optic cables. The construction will be extensive." I watched their faces as the implications sank in. Construction meant noise, dust, disrupted traffic, and property access issues for months. "Of course," Will continued, "there's also the matter of code compliance. Our preliminary assessment suggests several properties in this area may have unpermitted modifications. Brian's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Unpermitted modifications? Garage conversions mostly. If the city discovers unpermitted work during our construction permits process, they'll require full inspections of neighboring properties. Will's tone was matter of fact, but his message was crystal clear. Chelsea found her voice. How long would we have to decide? Well, construction begins in 6 weeks, Will said, checking his calendar. After that, living conditions will be quite challenging, but the offer stands until Friday. That gave them exactly 5 days to figure out how to come up with tens of thousands of dollars to bring their unpermitted garage conversion up to code, or accept his offer and walk away with a decent profit. As we prepared to leave, Will handed Brian his card. Think it over. Dorothy can answer any questions about the development timeline. Standing on their front porch, I allowed myself one small moment of satisfaction. Take care, you two, I said warmly. I hope everything works out for the best. My phone started ringing before I'd even made it back to my car. Brian's number flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then Chelsea called. Voicemail. Then Brian again. The third time Brian called, I was settled in my apartment with a cup of tea, and I decided to answer. Mom, what the hell is going on? His voice was high-pitched with panic. Language, Brian. And I thought I made it clear I wasn't your concern anymore. This isn't a game. That man is talking about tearing up our entire neighborhood. Mr. Hudson is talking about improving it, I corrected. Property values in the area will increase significantly. That's good news for homeowners who want to sell. We don't want to sell. We just bought this house. With my money, I reminded him gently. $40,000 of my retirement savings to be exact. Money I'll never see again. Apparently, the line went quiet. Then, Mom, I know we hurt you. Hurt me? I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. Hurt implies something accidental, Brian. You made a calculated decision to throw me away the moment I became inconvenient. Chelsea was emotional. The pregnancy hormones. Don't you dare blame this on pregnancy hormones, I snapped. Chelsea showed me exactly who she is, and you chose to support her instead of your mother. That's fine, you're adults, but actions have consequences. So what? This is revenge? You're trying to force us out of our home? I sighed, suddenly feeling very tired. Brian, the city had already identified this area for development. Will Hudson was already evaluating properties in this neighborhood. I just confirmed that your house had the kind of issues he looks for in acquisition targets. You could have warned us. Like you warned me before deciding I was useless? The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. Another long silence. Then, what do you want from us? I don't want anything from you anymore, I said, and realized I meant it. I wanted respect. I wanted to be treated like family instead of hired help. But it's too late for that now. Mom, please, Chelsea is pregnant. We need stability. Chelsea should have thought about stability before she decided to bite the hand that was feeding her. I hung up before he could respond. An hour later, someone was pounding on my door. Through the peephole, I saw Chelsea, mascara streaked down her cheeks, her face blotchy with tears. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Please, she said without preamble. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was stressed about the baby and I took it out on you. But this is insane. You can't destroy our lives because I said something mean. I leaned against my door frame, studying her. 6 months ago, this woman had systematically excluded me from family dinners, holiday plans, and even conversations in my own son's house. She'd made it clear I was unwelcome, unwanted, and unnecessary. Something mean, I repeated. Is that what you call it? I was wrong, she wailed. I admit it, but we're family. No, I said quietly. Family doesn't throw each other away. You made sure I understood I wasn't family. I'm just the woman who helped you buy your house. We'll pay you back. With what money? You're living paycheck to paycheck, and you're about to have a baby. Even if you wanted to pay me back, you couldn't. Chelsea's face crumpled completely. What do you want? How do we fix this? The question I'd been waiting for. The one that would determine whether this story had any chance of a happy ending. You want to know how to fix this? I asked Chelsea, who was still crying on my doorstep like a broken sprinkler system. It can't be fixed. You can't unring a bell, sweetheart. Her face went through about 6 different emotions before settling on desperate anger. So that's it? You're going to ruin us because your feelings got hurt? My feelings got hurt, I repeated slowly. Chelsea, you called me useless to my face and convinced my son to throw me out of his house. I sold my home to help you, and you repaid me by treating me like a burden you couldn't wait to discard. I said I was sorry. You said you were sorry because you need something from me. There's a difference. I watched her process this, her hand moving protectively to her belly. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Look, I continued, Will Hudson's offer is fair. More than fair, actually. You'll make money on the sale, and you can buy something better in a different neighborhood. We don't want a different neighborhood. We want our house. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to alienate the one person who was protecting you from exactly this situation. Chelsea's eyes narrowed. What do you mean, protecting us? I smiled, and it wasn't entirely kind. Honey, do you think it was an accident that Will Hudson contacted you the week after I moved out? Do you think it's a coincidence that he suddenly became interested in your specific street? The color drained from her face as understanding dawned. You see, Will and I have been having conversations for weeks. Lovely man. Very interested in neighborhood development opportunities, and I've been very helpful in identifying properties that might benefit from his attention. You planned this, she whispered. I planned to protect my family, I corrected, right up until the moment my family made it clear they didn't want my protection. Chelsea's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her face went even paler. Brian's coming over. Good. It's time we all had an honest conversation. 10 minutes later, Brian burst through my door like his hair was on fire. Mom, we need to talk. Chelsea said you admitted you set this whole thing up. I admitted no such thing, I said calmly. I explained that I've been consulting with Mr. Hudson about neighborhood development opportunities. Your property happened to be of interest to him. That's the same thing. No, Brian, it's not. Setting it up would imply I created the problem. I simply stopped preventing it. He stared at me, confusion written all over his face. What does that even mean? I walked to my kitchen and pulled out a manila folder I'd been keeping in my junk drawer. Inside were documents I'd hoped I'd never have to show them. 6 weeks ago, the city sent notice that your block was being evaluated for infrastructure improvement. They needed to verify that all properties were up to code before they could approve the development permits. I handed Brian the first document. This is the notice. It was mailed to all property owners on Maple Street. His face went white as he read. We never got this, because it was sent to the previous owners who forwarded it to their real estate agent, who contacted me since I was listed as the down payment contributor on your mortgage application. Chelsea grabbed the paper from Brian's hands. You've had this for 3 months and never told us? I've been handling it for 6 weeks, I corrected. Do you remember when I asked you about the garage conversion permits back in February? When I offered to help you get the paperwork sorted out? Brian's mouth fell open. You said it was just routine maintenance stuff. Because I didn't want you to worry during Chelsea's difficult pregnancy. I was working with a contractor friend to get everything brought up to code quietly. It would have cost about $8,000 and taken 2 weeks. The silence in my small apartment was deafening. Chelsea found her voice first. But you never did the work. I smiled sadly. That was going to be my moving out gift to you. Everything properly permitted, up to code, ready for the city inspection. I had it all arranged for next week. Brian sank into my couch like his strings had been cut. After we kicked you out, after you made your priorities clear, I said gently. Will Hudson was always coming, Brian. The development was always happening. I was just going to make sure you were ready for it. The weight of what they'd thrown away settled over them like a heavy blanket. Chelsea started crying again, but this time it was the quiet, hopeless kind of crying that comes with real understanding. Can you still fix it? Brian asked, his voice small. I looked at my son, my baby boy who'd grown up to break his mother's heart, and felt something crack inside my chest one final time. No, I said softly. It's too late for that now. But as I watched them leave, devastated and finally understanding the true cost of their cruelty, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that hurt the most to learn. The next morning brought 3 missed calls from Brian and a text from Chelsea that simply said, please. I deleted the text and made myself coffee, settling in to enjoy the quiet drama unfolding exactly as I'd expected. By noon, Will Hudson called. Dorothy, I wanted to update you. The Mitchell property owners requested a meeting. They're asking about payment plans for the code compliance work. I stirred honey into my tea, savoring the irony. Payment plans? Apparently they can't afford the $8,000 for permits and renovations up front. They want to know if we'd accept partial payments over time. And your response? I told them the construction timeline doesn't allow for extended payment schedules. The city needs compliance verification in 2 weeks, or the entire block gets red tagged during development. Perfect. What did they say to that? The young man got quite emotional, started talking about family obligations and people who should help family in crisis. Will's tone was carefully neutral, but I caught the underlying question. Family helps family. Mr. Hudson, but only when the relationship is mutual. These particular family members made their position quite clear regarding mutual obligations. I see. Well, they've asked for the weekend to make a decision. After hanging up, I walked to my window and looked out at the city I'd lived in for 40 years. Such a beautiful spring day. Perfect weather for new beginnings. My phone buzzed with another text from Brian. Mom, we need to talk, face to face, please. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. You had 6 months to talk face to face. You chose not to. The response came immediately. I'm coming over. I won't be home. But I was home, of course. I just didn't feel like pretending we had anything left to discuss. 20 minutes later, someone was knocking on my door. I ignored it. The knocking became pounding. Mom, I know you're in there. Your car's in the parking lot. I turned up the television and continued reading my book. The pounding stopped, but through my peephole, I could see Brian sitting on the hallway floor outside my door. He was there for 3 hours. When he finally left, he slipped a piece of paper under my door. I waited 10 minutes before picking it up. Mom, I know I can't undo what we did. I know sorry isn't enough. But Chelsea's scared about the baby, and we don't have anywhere else to turn. You're the strongest person I know. You always fix things. Please fix this. Brian, the strongest person he knew. Funny how strength looked different when you actually needed it versus when it was just convenient to have around. I folded the note and put it in my drawer with all the other things I decided to keep but never look at again. Friday arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind of steady downpour that makes everything look gray and defeated. I was reorganizing my bookshelf when my phone rang. Unknown number. Dorothy Mitchell? Speaking. This is Patricia Hayes, Brian Mitchell's mortgage officer at First National. I'm calling because your son listed you as an emergency contact, and we have a situation. I sat down carefully. What kind of situation? Mr. Mitchell called this morning requesting to add a home equity line of credit to cover unexpected expenses. However, our property assessment flagged some issues that need resolution before we can approve additional lending. What kind of issues? Unpermitted modifications to the structure. Our appraiser noted that the garage has been converted to living space without proper documentation. For us to proceed, the property would need to be brought into code compliance. I almost smiled. The mortgage company had discovered the garage issue independently. Perfect timing. I see. And why are you calling me? Your son seemed to think you might be able to help with the compliance costs. He mentioned you had experience with home renovation projects. I do have experience, I said carefully. What exactly did Brian tell you? He said his mother was in construction management and had offered to oversee the permit process. He seemed quite confident you'd handle the situation. Construction management. I'd been a secretary at an insurance company for 30 years, but apparently Brian was willing to say anything to get what he needed. Ms. Hayes, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not currently in a position to assist with this project. Oh, long pause. Mr. Mitchell was very insistent that you'd already committed to helping. Mr. Mitchell was mistaken. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to process what had just happened. Brian had told his mortgage company I was going to pay for the repairs, not asked me, assumed it. Even now, even after everything, he still thought I existed to solve his problems. My phone rang again. Brian this time. Mom, Patricia Hayes said you refused to help with the permits? I didn't refuse anything. I corrected her misunderstanding about my involvement. You told me you had it all arranged. The $8,000, the contractor, everything. I had it arranged when I lived in your house and considered myself part of your family. That arrangement died when you threw me out. This is insane. You're destroying us over hurt feelings. Something snapped inside me. Hurt feelings? Brian, do you have any idea what you've put me through? I sold my house, my home, to help you buy yours. I lived in a garage and paid you rent. I cooked your meals, cleaned your house, and tried to stay out of your wife's way while she treated me like dirt. Mom, I'm not finished. When I needed support after losing my home, you made me feel like a burden. When I needed family, you chose your wife's comfort over your mother's dignity. And now, when you need something, suddenly I'm family again? The line was quiet for so long, I thought he'd hung up. What do you want from us? He asked finally, his voice small. I want you to solve your own problems for once in your life. Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors. Through my peephole, I saw Chelsea's parents, Frank and Linda Morrison. I hadn't seen them since the wedding 2 years ago. I opened the door, genuinely curious. Frank, Linda, what brings you by? Linda looked uncomfortable, but Frank got straight to the point. Dorothy, we need to talk about this situation with Brian and Chelsea. I invited them in, made coffee, and listened as they explained that Chelsea had called them in tears, begging for money to fix permit problems with their house. She's 8 months pregnant, Linda said. The stress isn't good for her or the baby? Frank leaned forward. Dorothy, We know there was some kind of family disagreement, but surely we can work this out. We're all adults here. What exactly did Chelsea tell you happened? They exchanged glances. She said you moved out after an argument about privacy, that you were upset about not being included in baby planning. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Is that all? She mentioned you were hurt that they wanted to use the garage for the nursery instead of having you live there permanently. Interesting. So Chelsea's version had me as an oversensitive old woman who couldn't handle reasonable boundaries. Frank, Linda, let me tell you what actually happened. I walked to my kitchen drawer and pulled out the folder with the city notices. 3 months ago, I received these documents. I laid out the entire timeline. The code violations, my arrangements to fix them, the costs I was prepared to cover, and the exact words Chelsea had used when she kicked me out. Linda's face went very pale as I spoke. Frank's jaw tightened. She called you useless? Linda whispered. Among other things. Frank stood up abruptly. We raised her better than that. I'm sure you did. But people change when they get comfortable taking advantage of kindness. Dorothy, Linda said carefully, what would it take to fix this? Not just the house situation, but the family situation. It was a fair question from people who genuinely seemed to care about doing right. Linda, some things can't be fixed. Chelsea showed me who she really is when she thought it was safe to do so. Brian chose to support her rather than defend his mother. Those are character reveals, not momentary lapses. Frank nodded grimly. So what happens now? Now they deal with the consequences of their choices, just like everyone else does. And the baby? The baby will be fine. They'll sell the house to Will Hudson, make a profit, and find somewhere else to live. Chelsea will have learned that actions have consequences, and Brian will have learned that his mother isn't a bottomless well of unconditional support. As they prepared to leave, Frank turned back. For what it's worth, Dorothy, you're handling this exactly right. We'll be having a serious conversation with our daughter. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized something had shifted in my chest. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely peaceful. Monday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Dorothy, this is Will Hudson. We have a problem. I set down my crossword puzzle. What kind of problem? I just received a call from city planning. Someone filed a formal complaint about our development project, claiming we're using intimidation tactics to force residents out of their homes. My blood went cold. Who filed the complaint? Frank Morrison. Apparently he's some kind of retired city council member with connections. Chelsea's father. I should have seen this coming. Will, I can explain. Dorothy, the city is launching an investigation. They want to interview everyone involved in property acquisition for this project. That includes you. I closed my eyes. What kind of investigation? They're looking into whether Hudson Properties used unethical practices to pressure homeowners into selling. If they find evidence of intimidation or coercion, the entire development could be shut down. And my involvement? You're listed as a property consultant who provided inside information about specific addresses. They'll want to know how you identified the Mitchell property and what your relationship is to the owners. After Will hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Within 2 hours, my phone rang again. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the City Planning Compliance Office. We'd like to schedule an interview regarding your consulting work with Hudson Properties. Of course. When would be convenient? Today, if possible. This is time sensitive. The interview took place in a sterile conference room at City Hall. Detective Chen was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and the kind of quiet intensity that probably made suspects confess things they'd never intended to admit. Mrs. Mitchell, can you explain your relationship with Hudson Properties? I explained about my job as a property consultant, my knowledge of the neighborhood, and my role in identifying development opportunities. And your relationship to Brian and Chelsea Mitchell at 1247 Maple Street? Brian is my son. Chelsea is his wife. Detective Chen's pen stopped moving. You recommended your son's property for acquisition? I identified it as a property that would benefit from Mr. Hudson's improvement project, yes. After being asked to move out of that same property? So they knew. Of course they knew. Detective, are you familiar with the city code violations at 1247 Maple Street? She consulted her files. Unpermitted garage conversion. Yes. I spent 6 weeks trying to help my son resolve those violations. I arranged for contractors, secured permits, and was prepared to pay for all compliance work. This was before Hudson Properties was involved. But you didn't complete that work? I was asked to leave the property before the work could begin. And then you contacted Hudson Properties? This was the moment of truth. No, Detective. Hudson Properties contacted me. They were developing the area with or without my input. I simply provided accurate information about property conditions. Detective Chen studied me for a long moment. Mrs. Mitchell, some people might see your actions as revenge against your son. I met her gaze steadily. Detective, some people might see my son's actions as elder financial abuse. I provided Mr. Hudson with factual information about code violations that were already documented by the city. If that helped him make an informed business decision, I consider that good consulting work. The interview lasted 2 more hours. When it was over, Detective Chen walked me to the door. Mrs. Mitchell, off the record. Family disputes like this rarely end well for anyone. Detective, off the record. Sometimes people need to learn that actions have consequences, even when those people are family. 3 days later, Will Hudson called with news that would change everything one final time. Dorothy, the investigation is closed. I gripped the phone tighter. And? No fraud, no coercion, no unethical practices. The city found that all our development procedures were legitimate, and your consulting work was entirely appropriate. Relief flooded through me. What about the complaint? Withdrawn. Frank Morrison called this morning and apologized for wasting the city's time. Apparently, he had some enlightening conversations with his daughter. That afternoon, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Brian and Chelsea, both looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past week. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Mom," Brian said quietly, "we owe you an apology." "Several apologies," Chelsea added, her voice barely above a whisper. I waited. "My parents told us what you did," Chelsea continued, "how you tried to protect us, how you were fixing everything, and we—" Her voice broke. "We threw it all away," Brian finished. "We threw you away." I looked at my son, really looked at him. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, and looked genuinely devastated. "Yes," I said simply. "You did. Can you forgive us?" Chelsea asked. It was the question I'd been dreading, because I wasn't sure of the answer. "I can forgive you," I said finally, "but I can't forget what you showed me about who you really are when you think it's safe to be cruel." "We want to make it right," Brian said desperately. "How?" They looked at each other, then back at me. "We don't know," Chelsea admitted. "We don't know how to fix what we broke." "You can't fix it," I said gently. "But you can learn from it. Does that mean, is there any chance we can be family again?" I considered the question seriously. These two people had shown me their worst selves, but they were also showing me genuine remorse. "Maybe," I said finally. "But it would be a different kind of family, one based on mutual respect instead of convenience. One where my value isn't measured by my usefulness." Hope flickered in Brian's eyes. "We can do that." "Can you? Because Chelsea, the next time you're stressed about something, are you going to take it out on me? And Brian, the next time you have to choose between your wife's comfort and your mother's dignity, which will you choose?" They both started to answer, then stopped, understanding that these weren't rhetorical questions. "Think about it," I said. "Really think about it. And when you have honest answers, call me." 2 weeks later, they sold the house to Will Hudson for $450,000. After paying off their mortgage and closing costs, they walked away with $60,000 profit. They bought a smaller house in a different neighborhood, a house they could actually afford without anyone's help. Chelsea had the baby, a healthy girl they named Dorothy. It took 6 months before we had dinner together again. Not because I was punishing them, but because it took that long for us to figure out how to be family members instead of user and used. Today, a year later, we have a relationship that's smaller but stronger. Chelsea treats me with respect because she learned what happens when she doesn't. Brian makes his own decisions because he learned that his mother won't always be there to fix them. And me? I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people experience the consequences of their choices. I'm 65 years old, living in my own apartment, working a job I enjoy, and finally understanding that being family isn't about what you're willing to endure. It's about what you're willing to require. The baby's first word was Gamma. She said it while reaching for me across her high chair, and I cried happy tears because I knew that this little girl would grow up in a family that had learned how to value each other properly. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's victim ever again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.